Hello and be welcome to another episode of Let's Develop Conway's Game of Life. I finally decided to continue this series after I now completed the game loop implementation, copying or following rather the blog post of Eric Smith on developing a game loop. I now decided to take the path that some of you suggested in comments on my videos, and I'm going to try to create a UI for my Conway's Game of Life, which is, after all, the thing we need to actually make the game playable and a little more interesting, because then we can actually see the development of our universe. So since I'm neither an expert in game development nor an expert in UI development, we're going to have to see where this actually leads. And I'm going to trust Eric in his implementation of the game loop and try to consider this game loop implementation, or the interface of this game loop, which mainly consists of this game interface, the input handler interface, and the timer interface, and try to use that as is to achieve a playable game implementation of my Conway's Game of Life. So for starters, I'm going to look at the interface of this game loop implementation and see what things I'm going to have to do throughout the implementation of my Conway's Game of Life, and then probably in the next episodes we're going to explore some alternatives to UI for the game interface. So let's get started with this game thing here. You might remember there's this game loop implementation which I'm going to reuse as is, and this game loop takes as configuration a game implementation, which is somehow going to be my Conway's Game of Life game. Then it takes an input handler which controls the user input to the game, which is queried once every turn, and then it has a timer which somehow encapsulates the concept of time in the Conway's Game of Life. So yeah, actually, I think it's sensible to start with the last one, because the concept of time in Conway's Game of Life is quite clear to me. Essentially, one round in the Conway's Game of Life is exactly one update of the universe, right? So depending on how fast I want the game to evolve, I have to change this abstract concept of time, which is just an integer, in relation to the actual time. So I could, for example, say that the timer increases its current time once every second, and would thereby achieve that the universe updates once every second, which is, I guess, a sensible first choice for the universe's update time, so that we can actually see what's going on. But it's then very easy for me, at least I think so, to update or to change the concept of time to, for example, half a second or even faster, to see the evolvement of the universe in less time, or even slow it down to 2-3 seconds, whatever. If I have a bigger universe, that might make sense in order for me to actually see what's going on. Okay, let's go back to the game loop. So the time implementation, I have some intuition about what's going to happen. Then we have the input handler, which is somewhat of an interesting concept in the Conway's Game of Life, because we don't really have input, right? We don't have an input every round that updates the game state, but we might actually have a slightly different concept of input, which is an initial input. I want to have an initial configuration of my Game of Life universe, of the grid where I do start from. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to implement that using this input handler, because the concept of this input handler is that it's going to be triggered once every round. to produce some game input. What we could easily do, since conceptually the game of life is running infinitely, we could use the input handler to actually implement some button, some start-stop button, or at least a stop button that lets us quit the game, because the game itself doesn't end in that sense. So I somehow have to produce some user input, maybe on a UI like a stop button, and then I could return this value here from the input handler, which makes the game then stop updating the universe. I think we'll just have to maybe we start with a game that does not stop on its own, which essentially means that we have an empty input handler implementation, one returning no input at all. And then we can see where that goes. Maybe you guys have suggestions what input we could have for Conway's Game of Life. Maybe you have interesting ideas. If so, just send me a message or post a comment below this video, and I see what I make of it. Okay, which already leads me to the last component, which is the game interface itself. So it's clear to me that somehow I have to implement some game thing that's mapping to updating the universe. And if I have a look at my universe implementation, it's quite some time ago that I actually implemented that stuff, but I seem to remember that there's two classes, one of which is the universe, other of which is the cell. I don't think this is going to, or this game implementation is going to interact with cells directly, probably only to render the cells onto the screen somehow. But I think the main interaction component is going to be the universe, which has, if I remember correctly, an update method already. Right. So this is the interface method of the universe that should be called once every iteration, once every update round, for the universe to actually update its state. And I think this is probably going to be called on the implementation of this update method. And then there we already see what I briefly discussed when we talked about the input handler, that actually the update of the game interface takes some input, whereas the update of the universe does not take any input. So the updating of the universe is not user input dependent, which is for me another indicator that maybe we want to use this input we get here to control maybe the game state, like the running state of the game, and not the updating of the universe. Again, I don't see here how setting an initial state to the game, which somehow is the only user input I have in Conway's Game of Life, fits into this concept of a game loop. I guess, but that's really only a guess, I would have to ask Eric, maybe I do that, that this game loop is built with that kind of game in mind, where you have a like constant initial state that does not change for different players. Maybe I ask him how he would encode an changing initial input state for the game. But essentially, I guess, or my intuition is that we could somehow emulate it by allowing an initial one-time user input in the first game round, where we actually ask the user to provide an initial configuration of the universe, and then in subsequent update rounds we don't ask for it anymore. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some wizard-like pop-up in the beginning that allows you to set up stuff, and then you just have an stop button to stop the thing, and the rest is going on automatically. We're going to have to see where that leads. If you have ideas, again, just post me. Tell me about what you think, what your ideas are. Maybe we're going to produce an interesting implementation of Conway's Game of Life together. Okay, then what's left to do? We already talked a bit about is running. I guess this is somehow going to depend on the user input, because the game on its own runs indefinitely. And then we have this render method here, which is going to be responsible for putting out the universe's state to the user. And I think this is actually our main degree of freedom in the implementation, because depending on which kind of UI we choose, we're going to have different implementations for this render method. Maybe I'm even going to convert this into some kind of strategy, because I actually would like to explore different alternatives to the game UI. The most simple thing I can think of, which is maybe a bit boring, but an interesting start, I guess, especially in terms of testability, is to provide an UI implementation that's entirely based on the console. So just kind of an ASCII art output of the game, which then probably depends on you adjusting your console to the right size so that you can actually see the universe move, but we're going to have to see how that goes. And then some of you already suggested in comments that I should go for something like an SWT or JFace or a swing implementation. I'm just thinking that I'm going to do that. I have some experience with swing, so I may start there. Essentially, when it comes to testing, I've already read a lot that there is suitable, more or less, testing support for SWT. I have no idea of JFace, but maybe with some guidance of you guys, I can go there. So if you have some Java UI library of your choice and you have some experience about testing, if possible, test driving implementations with that UI interface, let me know about your experiences, about your ideas. Maybe I'm going to try out the libraries you used before. And then we can openly discuss what's the advantages or disadvantages of the different UI approaches. Since there's really, or in my point of view, no one size fits all and no true solution to UI interfaces, all I've tried so far have different advantages and disadvantages. I'm really willing to explore different alternatives and to discuss the advantages and drawbacks together with you guys. So yeah, if you have ideas, just shoot. Okay, and I guess that's already concluding this thoughts about the game implementation, or the Conway's Game of Life implementation, based on my game loop implementation, or based on Eric's game loop. I'm curious to see where this leads. I'm curious to see if that actually works, and if we can make do with the game loop implementation as is. My current feeling is we can, but I guess we will find out the truth throughout the next episodes. This already concludes today's episode. I hope you could take something from it. Give me feedback about what you think, how you would proceed, what you would do, and what you would like to see in this Conway's Game of Life UI implementation phase. And I'm going to do my best to incorporate your feedback, your ideas, to make this actually a joint work. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you next time.